Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I am here with Brian Batko, our Steelers beat reporter at the Post-Gazette, for our latest mock draft tracker video for the Steelers. Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Adam. Enjoying March Madness. We've got some good second-round games on tap today. In my Survivor poll, I'm picking Duke to beat Tennessee. So that means I can't pick them again, but feeling good about the way they've been playing lately.
Are you picking Penn State to beat Texas after what they did to Texas A&M?
No, not necessarily, but it should tell you something that I didn't take the Longhorns in the Survivor format because I'm not going to bet against my guy, Jalen Pickett and the Nittany Lions. That was a clinic that they put on Thursday night against the A&M Aggies.
Absolutely. We'll have to keep an eye on all of that. But, Brian, we want to get into some football talk here. It's the end of the first week of free agency. A lot of moves were made. A lot of moves were not made, depending upon, how you look at things. So the picks for the Steelers were shaken up a little bit this week around the mock draft world. The first guy I wanted to talk about was Brian Branch, the Alabama safety. Some call him just a defensive back. There's a lot of comparisons between him and Minkah Fitzpatrick as a guy who can kind of move around the defense and do some different things. And in light of the Steelers going out and getting Patrick Peterson and losing the versatility of a Cam Sutton in free agency, is a guy like Brian Branch someone maybe you take a look at now that you didn't before free agency this week?
Yeah, I'm still not sure about him as a first-round prospect or 17th overall prospect based on talent alone, but or value, I guess. But now, when you compare it to the Steelers' positional needs, I mean, the biggest holes right now on their defense are safety and slot corner, and those are kind of the two areas where Branch projects to the best in the NFL. So you have to at least consider what it would look like if you pick him. I don't necessarily think he'd be there at 32 unless a somewhat disappointing combine really knocks him down. He's not a real big guy. He's 6 foot 190. He only ran a 4.58. Like, his athletic testing is not great, but like you said, Adam, he has the Minkah comparison in part for playing for Nick Saban in Alabama and all the different roles he was used in. But it also is a lot that's connected to him through their football IQ and how cerebral they are. And that plays into why they were allowed to move all along that Crimson Tide defense so much. So maybe you can give him a pass a little bit on the workout in spandex and tank tops and say this guy's just a football player. So it would make a lot of sense. I think he could start from day one for the Steelers at really two positions potentially, depending on whether Terrell Edmunds comes back at safety. So I ultimately don't know that he's that good of a draft prospect, but I can understand why some people would be tempted by that move because it does fit with their roster needs.
Yeah, Brian, I got to be honest, with looking at his stock this week, he seems like a consensus first rounder. But I think a lot of people are saying kind of a similar thing to you, is that he's kind of a safe pick. He may not be maybe as dazzling as Minkah Fitzpatrick is, but he can do a lot of different things. So I guess my question for you is, would you rather have one of those top corners, Joey Porter Jr., Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, or would you rather have maybe even that next rung before we start talking about a Brian Branch? How would you kind of judge where Branch would be on your hierarchy compared to, like a Deonte Banks, for example?
That's a difficult call there. I mean, I get it. I think there's not too many players out there that are 6'2", 200 pounds, have great wingspans, and have been productive in major conferences like Keely Ringo and Joey Porter Jr., to say nothing of, Christian Gonzalez, who's kind of even maybe a tier above those guys, according to most draft experts. But with Branch, I mean, he's somebody who could be kind of a missing piece right now and one of those chess pieces in the secondary. So I still think it would be, a little bit of a reach. I think when you have a pick as high as 17, you want to go with somebody who has a little bit more upside and potential and can be molded in that way. But yeah, I think I'd probably have him above, like you said, that next group, the Deonte Bankses, Clark Phillips, Emmanuel Forbes. I think I'd prefer the readiness of Branch and the position flexibility with him over some of those other guys.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm landing too. It's I think a lot of people really want Joey Porter Jr. I think if he's available, that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But if he's not there and if those other guys aren't there, I think that's when it becomes a more complicated question of what your needs are versus what's available. I think it'll be interesting to see, maybe if they do between now and then, go after a safety, kind of like they did last year, late in the year with Terrell Edmonds. Late in the cycle.
That was a glaring hole for them a week before the draft last year. And then they did address that, as they tend to do, get kind of those stopgap players. I would say right now, even DeMonte KZ, you could say you have a starter caliber player at both safety spots, at both outside corners. Slot corner is questionable. Arthur Millette on the running downs or the early downs is serviceable, but they clearly didn't love his work last year, or they wouldn't have pulled him as often as they did in those coverage situations.
I think the one thing that tantalizes me a little bit about Branch too is that if you pair him with Minkah Fitzpatrick and KZ, we saw the Steelers work with having three safeties on the field at different points last year, and they used it to some effect. Does that make you curious at all about the options that you would have as a defense by adding a guy like him?
Yeah, it'd be a lot of interchangeable parts, a lot of keeping offenses off guard. Patrick Peterson just talked about that on Thursday at his introductory press conference. He was kind of asked about, hey, are you strictly going to be an outside corner here, or is there potential to move around the formation? And he said at this point in his career, he really hasn't moved around much, but that's because coaches have wanted him to take away the opposing team's best outside receivers. So there was never really any need to do it, but he said he's open to it. He thinks it could be good for him. It could be good for the Steelers, and it could keep quarterbacks off guard, not necessarily knowing who's going to line up where, who's going to drop into what zone. So that would definitely give the Steelers yet another piece of options that they would have in nickel sub package and even in dime sub packages. So the other thing about Branch that I guess I should say is he is renowned for being a pretty physical player too. I mean, I don't think he's a bad tackler. He's not the biggest guy. So you do wonder, I guess, if will some of the bigger backs that you might see in the NFL, will they be able to run through him more than players at the college level, albeit in the SEC? But I could certainly see a scenario where Tomlin falls in love with his football acumen, sort of the way that he has with Minkah Fitzpatrick's.
Another name that came up a couple times this week, kind of from the Gannett universe of publishing, I think it was Vikings Wire and Draft Wire, both had the Steelers taking Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, at number 17.
Brian, why do we care about what the Vikings Wire thinks of the Steelers draft?
I know. I kind of pulled it up and I saw Draft Wire and then I saw Vikings Wire. I was like, okay, this is two people now, so I'll just include that was being said. Okay. So let me ask the question this way. I feel like I'm leading in well to probably what you're going to say, but do the Steelers need a guard? I mean, is Kevin Dotson, I think I look at him as an inconsistent kind of guy, but is he a guy that you need to upgrade on with your 17th overall pick?
Not now that you also have Nate Herbig in the fold. I think that was a move to provide competition for Kevin Dotson and give you a backup who can play either side and maybe even fill in at center in a pinch. He didn't do a lot of that with the Eagles or the Jets, but it seems like he'd be willing if that's what they ask him to do. And he is, a bigger center, kind of like Mason Cole. So perhaps there would be some continuity in that sense. But no, at this point, I think, not only are Dotson and Herbig somewhat similar players, they're more maulers than quick athletic pulling guards, but Osiris Torrance is that same kind of guy too. He's massive. He's not he's not a David DeCastro type who you're going to feel good about getting around there and having good mobility and allowing you to do a lot of different zone blocking. I mean, these are just barroom brawlers, as they always say in these draft write-ups. So I didn't see that a while ago. I thought for a long time that if you're going to draft a quote-unquote guard in the first round, it better be a guard who can either slide inside to center to or slide outside to tackle as well. And Torrance isn't really that guy. He might be a great player for a team that is just truly missing, one interior lineman at left or right guard, and that could be the missing piece for them and be a smash mouth player in the NFL. But I don't think it makes much sense for the Steelers and what they have already.
Do you think that there's just a level of, with some of these mock drafts, we've seen a lot of different linemen. Some of them have made sense. Some of them haven't. Do you think there's just a case of a lot of these mock draft types just, on a national level, looking at the Steelers in a kind of oversimplified way, like Kenny Pickett needs protectors, and then they just pick the person that's like on their board at that spot that makes sense? I mean, do you think there's as much thought going into this maybe as if you're a Steeler fan, you'd prefer to see?
Yeah, I mean, I get it if you see that a team has a first-round pick who missed multiple games last year with concussions and or exited multiple games with concussions last year, and you've got a big investment in him in your roster, and you think, all right, well then, all things being equal, give them an offensive lineman. But it's a position where there's 5 guys at a time. It's not like you're rotating in. James Daniels is the Steelers' right guard. It sure looks like Mason Cole is their center, and Kevin Dotsner and Nate Herbig is going to be the left guard, I think. So it's as simple as that to me on the interior. If anything, again, like I said, maybe you draft a younger center and allow him to develop somewhat slowly and not have to plug and play right away like Kendrick Green did. Now that you have Mason Cole returning for his second season. But no, I think it makes a lot more sense to do a mock draft in that way when you say, hey, maybe the Steelers need another defensive back because the AFC North has such good quarterback play, or let's give the Bills a running back or a wide receiver because Josh Allen can't have enough weapons. Those are positions where, multiple guys cycle through over the course of a game. Offensive line is not that to me. There's something to be said for having depth. The Eagles are known for building their depth on the offensive line, and it's really paid dividends for them over the last couple of years. Nate Herbig was actually part of that a couple seasons ago. He filled in admirably for them, but at some point you reach a limit on how many sort of not position flexible linemen that you need.
Another name, Brian, that came up this week, I think it was Walter Football, brought Jalen Duncan from Maryland on the scene. They said the Steelers might go after him at number 32. That seemed a little high based on my studies of what his draft stock is at this point, how the scouts regard him. But I think with the connection to Maryland at some point, whether it's maybe later in the second round, maybe the third round, maybe the fourth, I think he could potentially fall to. He's a player that the Steelers may get multiple cracks at. We know that they, may want to address tackle. So is that a player you'd be interested in learning a little bit more about, given the ties and the fact that he matches up pretty well with the need?
Yeah, I mean, he's got the left tackle experience in college, and he's got all the traits that NFL people like. He's got the 6'6", 300-pound frame, and he's shown good footwork and athleticism on tape. So I understand why. I think this time a year ago, even when you looked at some of those way too early 2023 mock drafts, he was generally viewed as a first round type of guy. So, I mean, that tells me that maybe his 2022 campaign at Maryland wasn't as strong. But I mean, in the later rounds, if you're missing out on some of these top tackles, obviously the big three who might be gone even before 17. But, once you get into that even kind of next tier, if guys are flying off the board like Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones, then maybe Jalen Duncan gets pushed up. But I think he'd be more valuable to the Steelers if they believe that he could also play the right side too, or maybe even slide inside to guard. Position flexibility is key if you're not going to be a starter on the offensive line. And Jalen Duncan is somebody who, again, I don't think he's in the elite tier. I'd certainly be surprised to see him go with the first pick of the second round. But he sure seems to be a talented guy, and it wouldn't be a bad thing to get a tackle who maybe isn't a finished product right away, but somebody you can mold and develop over the course of a year or two.
Yeah, and I think it definitely helps that if the Steelers did go that direction, Mike Tomlin's seen that guy's game, and so he can coach that guy a little bit more directly than maybe he would someone he's just learning about through the process.
If he was zeroing in on the left tackle when he was watching Maryland games for his son, we don't necessarily know, but you got to think that a 6'6", 305-pound left tackle at Maryland probably catches his eye.
Exactly. I think the other second-round pick that Walter Football mock draft had was Jonathan Mingo, the Ole Miss receiver. He's, I think, pretty big.
Walter Football using the old Raiders draft board, because these are some picks out of left field, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, because these are guys that I don't know, if you'd said they were like third or fourth round targets for the Steelers, I'd have said, that makes a fair amount of sense to me. But they're flawed players, I think, and they don't offer the kind of upside that I think you and I have talked about in some different mocks. We've been talking about Keely Ringo, Brzee from Clemson. Those are the names that we want to be talking about. I don't know if these guys fit that mold, but given that the Steelers did not address receiver, at least as of when we're recording this video, in free agency, is Mingo a guy that would be on your radar as we got into those middle rounds, because he has those skills in the slot?
Well, now I'd like to see Ringo and Mingo match up at St. Vincent, on the perimeter there. But Jonathan Mingo is kind of curious. I mean, you sent me this week's mock draft tracker, and I saw his name in there, and surprised to see him that high. But then I remembered that I saw another outlet. I think it was the 33rdteam.com, which does some pretty good draft stuff. They're a little newer on the scene, but I think they've got a lot of former NFL scouts and player types working for them and putting together their evaluations and their rankings. And they were very high on Jonathan Mingo. So I looked into him a little bit more coming out of Mississippi. And, there's not a lot to dislike other than just not much production. I mean, he got better every season, all 4 years with the Rebels, but I think he topped out at like 800 some yards last season. Now they had a lot of weapons on offense, so that could be part of it too. But I mean, he's 6'2". He ran like a 4.46, I want to say, at the combine. So you kind of stack those things up, and you're just like, why wouldn't this guy be a day 2 pick at wide receiver, even if you don't see his name? So maybe as the NFL media prognosticators kind of catch up to somebody who's a little bit under the radar, because you understand that a lot of this is groupthink. The same names kind of get recycled in and out, and some of that's informed from insiders who talk to the teams that are tracking these guys. But also part of it is just, hey, this guy's a first rounder on all these mocks. He better be a first rounder in mine, or I'm in left field with a hockey stick. So maybe Jonathan Mingo is somebody who should be getting a little bit more hype. He was a big yak guy in college, and he's supposedly somebody who could step right in and be that big slot type of player. And I think the Steelers would do well to bring in somebody like that if Calvin Austin isn't a seamless fit with his lack of size and obviously missing all of his rookie year with the foot injury.
Brian, do you think the fact that they didn't address receiver in free agency, at least as of when we're talking, makes it more likely that they'll go after a receiver in the draft? Or is it an indication from them that they're thinking, no, we're happy with what we've got, or we can find some camp invite guys to mix in, see if we can catch some lightning in a bottle there? How would you read their posture right now?
I think it's more likely that they will get back to drafting another wide receiver. I think it could be a later round guy. I mean, you don't want to completely flood the zone when you already got, Deontay Johnson with the contract extension, George Pickens. You just used the second and a 4th round pick on the position last year. So I don't think you want to go too high, but I'd start thinking about one in the 3rd or 4th round, depending on what else you've been able to address before that. And, even the 7th round, the Steelers have had great success finding receivers that late. You never bet on a 7th round pick hitting, but this could be a class where, you don't jump at the Jordan Addisons or Jackson Smith and Jigbas. Maybe somebody falls to you with those last couple picks. You got to do something with those picks. I wouldn't recommend drafting a Chris Oladokun type again if you're not having any intentions of giving that guy reps. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's more likely. I kind of look at, though, one guy who's so always the forgotten man here, including by myself, is Anthony Miller. He's kind of the free agent pickup for them this offseason. He's a veteran receiver who was having a great camp, showing a great chemistry with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett in St. Vincent, but then he had the shoulder injury and was never heard from again. But the fact that they kept him around all year on IR rather than reaching one of those settlements and just kind of moving on shows me that they still think that Anthony Miller might have something in him and could help them in 2023.
Brian, in the broader draft world, one of the bigger stories was that Jalen Carter, the formerly presumed number 1 overall pick,
or at least number 1 prospect. Yeah.
Yeah. He had a rough pro day. And he obviously also was dealing with the incident in which his teammate and a Georgia support staffer were killed while they were there was an incident with racing and things like that. This week he got probation for that. Is it possible that we need to be talking more about Jalen Carter, given that maybe he's not the bona fide top 5 pick that he entered draft season as?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't see him pop up with any of these mock drafts and being connected to the Steelers like he did a couple weeks ago when the news first broke at the Combine that he was going to be in some legal hot water with this at the very least. I think it was somebody from CBS Sports, maybe Chris Trapasso, had him falling all the way to the Steelers at 17. That line of thinking seems to have cooled off a little bit, or maybe Chris Trapasso was just on an island with that. But I feel like people aren't talking about this enough. Maybe it got buried to some degree with Georgia's pro day being in the middle of free agency. But, the fact that he couldn't finish the drills, he was 9 pounds heavier than he played or last time, he weighed in for the pre-draft process. He dodged media interviews again, which, hey, this guy's currently, I guess, answering to actual prosecutors. So, reporters are pretty small potatoes compared to that. But it does make you wonder, like, what's the deal here? Why the lack of transparency? What are they trying to hide? Maybe even. And I thought it was really interesting that Kirby Smart naturally was asked about this and asked about what's going on with Jalen Carter. And apparently he, like, even before all of this, the tragedy that happened in Athens, he didn't really talk to the media much when he was with the Bulldogs. So I don't know what's going on with that situation. Kirby Smart was asked about him, and I just noticed that Smart praised his competitive character, battling through injuries to come back for his team. It's like, maybe I'm reading into it too much, but to use the word competitive character is almost intentionally skirting around discussing his actual character. So I just think people should be talking about it more. Like, is this guy completely bombing his stock here a little bit more than a month before the draft? Or is every team going to be kind of willing to overlook this and say, it was cramps that got him during his workout? He'll be in good shape once the season comes. We'll get him in the weight room. He's still a physical freak and a beast, which he is. But maybe they'll say, hey, he's a good kid. He made one mistake that unfortunately changed, the lives, lost the lives of 2 people that night and changed his life forever. But we'll see. The Jalen Carter thing is, I don't know about you, I can't remember the most recent, like, murky character concern type of guy that we've had this high in the draft.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that it seems like the teams are jockeying around for the quarterbacks right now. Obviously, the Bears traded out of number 1, traded to Carolina.
Carter was never going to be the number 1 pick. Like, he was always kind of, it's going to be whatever team doesn't need a quarterback picks first. Probably look for Jalen Carter. But even now, I don't know that that's the case, because as I'm looking at some of these newer mock drafts, I'm seeing him more often go 6, 7, 8, 9. So that is interesting. And you do have to wonder. I know we talked about it a couple weeks ago. Like, if the fall goes all the way to the Steelers, a team that needs to, strengthen their interior defensive line, not exactly an enviable position to be in unless they are very confident that all the red flags with him are no problem.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing will be is if he, 6, 7, 8, probably a little high for the Steelers to trade up. But if it starts falling to like 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in that range, Is that something that they could pull off? And if they could, is that a move that they should make?
Yeah, or would you want to? I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, they took a chance. I don't know about chance, but they drafted a player last year who had some of those like attitude, mentality whispers about him in George Pickens, and he had a great rookie year. And Mike Tomlin later went on to say last season that he sort of resented that was a storyline with Pickens, or that it will continue to be a storyline with Pickens. So maybe it's much ado about nothing. But the last thing I'll say on this subject, Adam, it probably can't hurt that Tomlin, Omar Khan, and company were down in Athens for that pro day. So I'm sure they had their ear to the ground, in addition to being able to actually speak with and watch Jalen Carter up close.
Yeah, and I think, if they did have interest in him, the fact that Cam Hayward's here, to me, is kind of the whole conversation. If he wasn't, I think it'd be a completely different situation. But you have that, consummate pro in Cam Hayward who can maybe, address some of that from a leadership perspective. So I think that's where it begins.
How did that work out with Devin Bush?
What'd you say?
How did that all kind of work out with Devin Bush? I feel like he went off the rails and never really came back to reality. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's a locker room with a lot of veteran leadership, and obviously, one of the more venerable head coaches in the league. Although, of course, some think he is too lax for players who have any sort of off the field issues. So that's probably a chat for another day.
Absolutely.
There's no easy answer on that one.
Yeah. Brian, before we go, did free agency, I guess, either broadly speaking in terms of around the NFL or specifically with the Steelers, did it change your outlook on their draft at all? And if so, how?
Not really. I think they operated a lot in the same vein that they have in years past when Kevin Colbert was the GM. None of these big flashy signings, but the type of acquisitions that can essentially be a bridge to whatever rookie you might feel compelled to draft in the first round, giving you a lot more flexibility to go best player available within reason. I don't think they're going to take a tight end or running back in the first round, but there are now a lot of other positions that are kind of open to them. And, they haven't gone the edge rusher route yet, at least in free agency. They could still have a move up their sleeve for that, but it does kind of make me wonder, even though you've got two firmly established starters and they're both going to be here for a long time, assuming Alex Highsmith gets that extension, do you feel like there's good value in edge rushers on day 2 of the draft, even if it's going to be somebody who's obviously a complementary piece for you, a backup or a rotational player?
Yeah, I think those things will be all very interesting to watch. Brian, thanks for joining.
We'll probably discuss them on future mock draft episodes of the show.
Yeah, I mean, we still got several to go here, Brian. It's mid-March. I think we got at least 6 weeks left before we're really in the draft, so we got plenty of time to talk about all this.
Yeah, we'll make up something to talk about from pro days, I'm sure, and then there is a little bit of that lull. I mean, the month of April, once you get into draft season, is so long. The speculation is never ending. And there's not really much happening once the pro days are down, except for maybe teams could spice it up with some trades.
Yeah, I think this process has become about 2 weeks too long.
I actually think the draft should be way earlier, and free agency should come after the draft. But that is another road that we don't necessarily have to go down right now, and it'll probably never change because NFL people are pretty stubborn and stuck in their ways. But I actually think it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. But Brian, for now, we just have a lot of time to still talk about these prospects. So I look forward to bringing you back. Obviously, if you're just joining us for the first time and you enjoyed this video, please pop a like on the video, help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Chris Carter on the North Shore Drive is going to have a lot of football talk, a lot of March Madness talk. Everyone's watching the games with Pitt and Penn State and West Virginia all in this year. So make sure you're checking that out. Make sure you're subscribed to postgazette.com. There's a link down in the description for $6 for 6 months of access. That's everything I'm writing, everything Brian's writing for $1 a month. Pretty good deal. So you should check that out for sure. And otherwise, we'll talk to you soon, Brian. Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Thanks, Adam. See you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.